The International Association for Near-Death Studies presents NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Whitting.
How do the brain and mind interrelate? Is the term mind interchangeable with the word soul? And what is the real reality, this dimension or the next? Welcome to IANDS NDE Radio, brought to you by the International Association for Near-Death Studies. I'm your host, Lee Whitting. Almost everyone who has experienced an NDE has a clear understanding that their brain was not the agent of intelligence as they passed out of their bodies, traveled to other places in this world and the next, and had experiences unexplainable by a body and a brain and trauma. For example, a patient in the operating room has a sudden heart attack and dies. Their consciousness leaves their body, watches for a while as the doctors try to CPR the heart back into action, then travels into the family room down the hall where relatives are grieving. Later, when the patient recovers, she tells the doctors what they did and said and repeats the family conversation they overheard. Such experiences are called veridical because they offer evidence that cannot be explained by the actions of a dying brain. Clearly, another vehicle of intelligence is at work here. Our guest on NDE Radio today is Robert Mays, who, together with his wife Suzanne, has been thinking about and researching this mind-brain connection for more than 35 years. Besides his role as an officer on the board of directors at IANDS, Robert is a former award-winning software engineer for IBM and has taught chemistry at a number of Waldorf schools. Despite this background in science, however, he has decided that the traditional scientific way of approaching these questions, which is investigating the brain's workings in the physical world as the starting point, leaves too much out of the picture. In this you can't get there from here realization, Robert and Suzanne have focused on reports of NDEs as the enlightening path toward gaining an understanding of the relationship between brain and mind. Robert, welcome to NDE Radio.
Thank you, Lee.
Robert, before we get into your research, 2 weeks ago you hosted a symposium in New York City titled A Journey to Heaven and Back, featuring Eben Alexander, Anita Moorjani, and Lorna Byrne. What came out of that conference?
Well, it was very successful interaction. I was a moderator. I gave a talk at the beginning, and then Eben gave a talk about his experiences. I interviewed Lorna Byrne, and then Anita Moorjani gave her talk, and then we had a panel discussion, which I led, and then we had sharing of near-death experiences at the end from people in the audience, and it was very successful. Had a lot of good interactions in the panel discussion between Lorna, Anita, and Eben. So it was very interesting for the audience, I think.
Was there any discussion of the nature of consciousness?
No, not really. We were focusing on heaven, so we were not focusing on that. I did touch on that in my talk a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, Robert, 2 years ago, you and Suzanne wrote a very interesting paper titled A Theory of Mind and Brain That Solves the Hard Problem of Consciousness. And I wonder if you could give our listeners a taste of what that's about.
Right. Well, the hard problem of consciousness is how to explain how consciousness can come about from the operation of the brain, the electrical activity in the brain, which are just what are called action potentials, electrical impulses that occur in the neurons of the brain. How can that turn into something that is our subjective experience of the world, perceptions and feelings and thoughts? And that is philosophically and also scientifically, that's very hard to explain. So the hard problem is how to explain phenomenal experience from the electrical activity of the brain. And we work, based on the near-death experience and also shared death experiences, looking at what is happening to consciousness. And as you said in the introduction, consciousness appears to separate from the body in a near-death experience. And also in shared death experiences, the people who are attending a dying person observe the same thing. They can observe a kind of grayish mist separating from the body at the time of death, and also be out of their bodies themselves with the person who is dying, and actually go through a number of the elements of a near-death experience. So both of these phenomena have good evidence, strongly suggestive evidence that consciousness is an entity and it separates from the body and brain. And so that is the heart of our theory, that mind is a kind of energetic field and has physical interaction with physical processes in the world, but the mind is an entity that is the seat of consciousness of a person, the essence of the person. People say, well, is that the soul or is that the spirit of the person? Well, those are terms that people can use, and we are talking about the phenomenon, so we can give it any name we want, and we chose the word mind because that's has less connotations of religious nature.
Yes.
So our theory is that the mind is bound to the brain tightly when we're in our bodies. When in ordinary consciousness, the mind is working with the brain. If there's a trauma or injury or illness, then the mind can separate, and that's the near-death experience. And then afterwards, after the person comes back to their body, then the mind reunites with the brain and body, but doesn't quite fit in exactly the way it used to be, and so there are after effects.
You have on your website, you have a chart that shows interlocking circles of brain and consciousness, and both the brain and the consciousness, and their part of the circle, have their own abilities, and then there's this overlapping ability. And I thought that was a very neat visual for what you're talking about.
Right. Well, in looking at how consciousness works in ordinary consciousness, there's a very intimate connection and interdependence between what is subjectively experienced and what is happening in the neurons of the brain, neurological processes. So there's a very clear overlap in ordinary consciousness that the mind is working with the brain intimately, and there are specific areas of the brain where where certain activity occurs, and there is a corresponding subjective experience. And so those areas must be connected with the mind. The mind must be connected with those areas in order for there to be that subjective experience. So it's a very intimate union of the mind and the brain in ordinary consciousness, and that's why our consciousness is so dependent upon the brain's operations. And when the brain's, when there's trauma to the brain, when there's lesions in the brain, and so on, there are deficits, cognitive deficits, because the mind doesn't have that part of the brain to work with. And this also kind of implies that there is some sort of interaction, and you could say, well, how could something that's not material, the mind, interact with something that's very material, the neurons of the brain? And well, we've done a number of investigations through experimentation on one part, and also looking at the literature. And there's quite a bit of evidence that the mind, this mind entity, energetically can interact with physical processes. In fact, we've found evidence in NDEs that this, where a person can tickle a person who's out of the body in an NDE can tickle somebody, and they will respond or react to it. They can be seen by animals. The entity, even though it's invisible to normal people's sight, can be seen, for example, by a dog. When a person in an NDE passes through a wall frequently, not every time, they will they sense that there's a slight difference in density in passing through the wall, so that they have this sense that they're interacting with physical matter, but it is very subtle, and it's obviously not usually felt by somebody in their body when they're interacting. And these interactions have an electrical quality. So all of these things, and of course, a near-death experiencer is experiencing things in the physical realm, which is dependent upon physical light, and hearing things like monitors beeping, which are dependent upon sound waves. So these are also physical interactions. So the mind can interact with physical processes. It's very subtle interaction, but that's all that's needed in interacting with neurons in the brain.
It's always seemed to me that the brain is almost an enemy of mystical experience, because it's designed and oriented toward our survival in the three-dimensional world that we live in, and doesn't want us to die. And of course, that's the world of the conscious mind is really the next world, the spiritual world. So, in defense of the body, the brain excludes, to me, it seems like a lot of our potential for mystical experience and visions of the other side, and we almost have to disable the brain in order to experience that.
Yeah, or we may need to develop our capacities as human beings to transcend the body. I think that when we are here on Earth, we have purpose. We have things to learn. We have things to do, and to develop ourselves. And that's a very important thing. That's what NDEs are always saying, that they are sent back because they have something to do. And so there's a reason why they're sent back, and of course that implies there's a reason why we're here. And so I think it's reasonable to say that part of that reason is for us to develop the capacities that will in the body with our brains and with our physical life to show what the NDEs say, to show more love and to gain knowledge. And these are things that the NDEs say, and it makes perfect sense. So I wouldn't say that the brain is holding us back. I think that the brain gives us something that we have to work through, and that's part of what we're supposed to be doing.
Your observation about the dog being able to see the spirit, the consciousness, you have a footnote in your paper that I had circled because, and let me read it. Jerry Casebolt recounted his NDE at age 7 when he hovered above and just out of reach of a dog on a playground, with the dog repeatedly wagging its tail, jumping up and down, and barking at him. They looked into each other's eyes. Jerry was moving up and down to the sides, and they moved together like a dance. I thought that was really interesting.
Right. Yeah, that his NDE was really quite remarkable. He's the one who tickled in another part of his experiences. He was accompanied by an angel, is what he said, and the angel was, he was wandering through the hospital, and he came across a ward where there were patients there sitting around, and he went up to one person who was really just jabbering away, probably with dementia, and he tickled the woman's nose, and she sneezed, and he did that several times, and so there was a physical interaction as well. And the issue with the dog, that's what a dog will do. If you're playing around with a dog in your body, but clearly the dog was doing this, reacting to him, and the barking and the jumping up and down frightened the other children on the playground, and the angel said, "Okay, that's enough of that," and Jerry had to go somewhere else.
Now, dogs have a reputation for also responding to ghosts in a haunted house, for example, and sometimes it's with fear. I mean, their hackles will rise and they'll bark at something that normal people can't see. How would you compare the nature of ghosts to the nature of our consciousness?
Well, they certainly seem to be similar. There's a number of phenomena, and that's one of the things that led us to say, well, the ghosts could easily be discarnate individuals who have, are still in the physical plane, and that's what NDEs report. George Ritchie's NDE, the first part of it, where he met Christ, and the Christ was saying, taking him on a tour. The first place they went was to a city, some place where he saw how discarnate people were interacting with the living people, and of course the discarnate people couldn't be seen, and they had all kinds of interactions. A mother was berating her son, her grown-up son, and of course, probably what she did in life, and of course the son couldn't hear her. There was a young boy, a teenage boy, who was pleading with his girlfriend to forgive him. He had committed suicide, and she didn't hear him. There's those kinds of interactions which are suggestive that the ghosts that we, people sometimes see or apparently see are real, and that the dog interacting with seeing something and reacting in a fearful way is probably the same thing.
My brother had an experience years ago when he was in college that he told me about, where he was asleep and he was dreaming. He thought about a friend in another state, and the next morning he got the phone call from his friend saying, "What were you doing last night? I woke up and I saw you standing at the foot of my bed."
Right. Yes. There's a very famous out-of-body experience, the same sort of thing, where a woman in England, her husband was on a ship and she was concerned about him, and showed up in the stateroom where he was staying, and there was a fellow that was with him. This was in the 1800s, and he said, well, there was this woman in the room, quite unusual. Didn't know who she was, but it was his wife, the man's wife. So there was, so that sort of thing does happen, at least it's reported, those kind of out-of-body experiences through dreams, yes. And that's also suggestive of, the mind separating even when we're asleep.
Do you see the exploration of consciousness going today, more in the direction that you're looking at it from, or are people still harping about the dying brain and the closing down of the optic nerve and all of these physical manifestations that they're attributing near-death experiences to?
Well, those are still brought forward. There's a recent book by Gerald Worley, just published, Illusory Soul, where he's making that argument. And we feel that really is not a very sound argument, and Bruce Grayson has wrote about this in a chapter in Handbook of Near-Death Experiences, that physiological factors are not explanatory of near-death experiences because, just briefly, they're superficially like a near-death experience, but they do not have the ultra-real, some elements of near-death experience, but they don't have the ultra-real nature of the experience. And so there are, for any particular physiological factor, we can cite dozens or hundreds of cases where that physiological factor is not there, and yet there's a near-death experience with all of the elements. So the physiological factors only explain, one or two elements, and having all of the physiological factors is practically, is impossible, and you can't find a case where somebody has all of the elements of a near-death experience, but not even some of the physiological factors. And so it's much more reasonable to say that that these physiological occurrences, cardiac arrest and so on, are triggers for the experience, but they don't explain that they are not the cause of the experience. The cause of the experience, in our view, is that the mind is an entity that separates from the body, and that can be triggered by a number of factors, and most of them physiological, but those factors aren't the cause of what the experience is. And what's common among all near-death experiences appears to be that this separation of consciousness. Yeah, and this, yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to. Well, no, you finish because I had a little bit different question.
Go ahead. No, I'm done.
Oh, okay. I was wondering if since you've started thinking about these things, if you've noticed a change in the various denominational points of view about near-death experience, because for a long time, churches seem to be opposed to any consideration of NDEs.
Right. There are a couple of aspects of that. First of all, some Christians, pastors and so on, feel that this NDE is true because look, the person saw Jesus and the person had these experiences, all of which are biblical and supported by biblical passages, and there's nothing in it that isn't biblical. And others say, well, it's all the work of the devil, and these things are really near-death experiences appear to be, finding a common ground among religions. I was just listening to the talk that Mary Neal gave at the conference, the video of it, and she said that that there is one God, and it is God of all people. And whether you're in the United States or Afghanistan or China, it is one God, and that's clearly what she experienced her near-death experience, and that is what other, near-death experiences are saying, that the reality that they experience is really the spiritual reality that is common for all of us, and so the differences in religion, well, people need to come to their own conclusions about it, but it sure seems like that is a better way. It kind of unites all religions, and that's really the response to that.
One of the remarkable things about the new Pope is that he seems to be saying the same thing, that it's if you have the capacity to love, he said even atheists will, he'll see them on the other side, was the way he put it.
Yes. And in fact, that is that is the message of near-death experiences, that we are here to learn to love and to love. And that's the message that, the being of light gives to the near-death experiencer. Have you loved the way I am loving you now? And that is the essence of it. And the near-death experiencer says, well, no, I'm just a human being. Well, the being of light says, well, you can do better.
And we certainly can.
And we certainly can.
Robert, before we run out of time, tell our listeners how they can find your research online and how they might get in touch with you if they have some questions.
Right. Well, our website is selfconsciousmind.com, spelled out, selfconsciousmind, all one word, .com. And our research papers are there. The theory of mind and brain that solves the heart problem is there. A couple of videos are featured there, and contact information is there. So that's where they should go.
Okay. And maybe you could tell them a little about our IANDS website, too.
Oh, wow. Sure. Well, our IANDS.org, IANDS.org. We have a lot of information there. You need to spend some time and search the menus and see things. The most popular part of our website are the NDE stories, and we are posting them several times a month. Hopefully, the office is getting up to date with that, and also we have videos that are linked from there. We have an IANDS YouTube channel, which is IANDS Videos, IANDS VIDEOS, IANDS Videos, and there's a lot of other information. And of course, we encourage people to join because IANDS, because there are a lot of benefits on the website that you can get. And also there are gifts that you can get when you join, so at certain levels. So we would like people to visit our website. It's a great resource.
It is, and you carry a lot of news about NDEs as well. Yes,
yeah, ongoing news, and there's a lot of good news, things that aren't yet even on the website. There's a book which is unfortunately all just now only in Dutch, written by Titus Rivas and Rudolf Schmidt about they are recounting 78 veridical NDEs with veridical perceptions that where there's been a third-party confirmation of them. And of course, many people know the common ones, the famous ones, Maria Shu and Al Sullivan, and some recent ones, Dr. Lloyd Rudy, so that's there, and we're going to write an article about that. And and there's new upcoming news about the AWARE study, which is very preliminary results have now been published, and hopefully we can get some more details, and we'll write an article about that. So there's a lot of good news that's there.
That's great. Well, we're out of time, Robert. I want to thank you for being our guest today on NDE Radio, and to tell the folks that if you'd like to listen to this program again, it'll be archived along with our other shows at nderadio.org. Check out the IANDS website, IANDS.org. We'll be back next Monday at 11 a.m. Eastern for more NDE Radio. Thanks for listening.